week on Storyboard, Shereen Bhan, managing editor CNBC TV-18, speaks to the top CEOs about how they are dealing with the big challenges and changing times that their respective brands face in today's times. We speak to Eric Salama, CEO Kantar, about the challenges that the group faces globally and its strategies worldwide and plans for India. And Snapdeal is urging the consumers to unbox Zindagi. Hello and welcome to Storyboard. This is Shibani Gharat. The third annual Brandz Top 50 Most Valuable Indian Brands report came out recently, and HDFC Bank topped the list for the third consecutive year. The report also showed that the total value of India's top brands has risen by 30% over the last 3 years. The top 50 brands are now worth a whopping $90.5 billion. On the sidelines of the launch of this report, Shereen Bhan, managing editor CNBC TV-18, spoke to the top CEOs from various sectors about how they are dealing with the big challenges that their brands face in the changing times today. Let's hear the conversation.
As the market is changing, as the consumers that you address become younger, as technology starts to disrupt your business as well, what is the biggest challenge that you see for your industry and specifically for HDFC Bank?
See, fundamentally, we don't see the disruptors as a challenge because we're looking at it as an opportunity in terms of what they bring in. What they are disrupting is on top of the banking system. So none of them is setting up a bank. And so we can use that same technology to offer an equivalent product. If we offer an equivalent product, then with our brand value superimposed on that product, we should come out ahead if we start from the same length. So fundamentally, two things are happening. The real world will continue to exist for a while, or may exist for even longer because nothing disappears. You know, you had the brick and click and they said brick will disappear. It won't disappear.
So that's interesting. What you're talking about at this point is re-engineering the back end or the business model to cope with the disruption that we're seeing on the technology front. But what does that mean as far as the brand itself is concerned?
The brand itself, you see, as long as how we built the brand is built on salience, trust, and being able to get the right product and positioning. That doesn't change in the real world or in the digital world. As long as we can deliver again and again a better product at a more competitive price, backed by our traditional, what you call soft values, then in traditional marketing, emotions always override thinking. So but
is there something specific that you're doing different today?
We are looking at connecting with the customers, which is very difficult, but we are all learning on social media. And that's where you have to change, and you have to move to attention, and then involvement, and then advocacy.
Can I do a show of hands here? How many of you are struggling? Is that the number one challenge today? Is how do you reach out to consumers? How do you deal with social media, both the positives as well as the negatives of social media? Is that one of the top challenges that you as brand custodians face today? A show of hands? No? Mr. Puri is the only one who's facing that problem. Suresh Narayanan, you're not facing that problem today?
Well, let me put it, I guess what, if I were to understand Aditya right, it is really to be able to continue to do this day in and day out and over different periods of time. So if that is the consideration, then surely for me, this is really one of the big challenges that we have. I mean, if you look at our own brand history and the way we have evolved in the country, I think we have looked at embracing social media and digital media as the new language of the generation that we're talking to. As I've always said, the issue is not marketing to the digitally enabled. It is really the question of getting yourself enabled in order to be able to consistently have a conversation. And that, I believe, is certainly something that will address and will be a key issue at the center of the plate for all marketeers, whether you're a bank or you're a service or you're a brand. It is going to be center of your plate.
I wanted to take that conversation forward, and Priya, maybe you can chip in there as well. And every organization talks about being an organization driven by purpose. The purpose, of course, has changed. For instance, PepsiCo's purpose has changed now. Effectively, aggressively over the last several years from saying, you know, we're now good for you, and that is driving the company's strategy as well. But how important is it for this to be understood in an authentic way, for brands to also be able to communicate this in an authentic way? Because all of us want to say we want to do good for society and so on and so forth, but people can see through if it's an inauthentic message, and that can actually work against the brand then.
So I think, actually just sort of, that's the word that was almost in my head, was authenticity. And I think it's no longer good enough to just sort of, be about image and what you're trying to build, but actually who you are, where the product is made, how it is made, what you stand for, and this has to be real. I think gone are the days where you can just have imagery and fluff and, because the consumer knows, and the consumer is far more enabled today with choice, knowledge, and therefore you just can't afford to be inauthentic anymore, because I think it will just go right through if you are it. I think that those days of marketing are more than over.
So let me use a current example to get both you and Mr. Narayanan to talk about a challenge that perhaps brands like yours are facing today. And this is this business of mixing commerce with spirituality, religion, nationalism, patriotism.
Sure.
How do you contend with that? I mean, there's no bones about the way that Patanjali is using that to hit out against likes of Nestle and HUL. How does the brand respond to something like that?
Sure. So I think actually each of these are really what the consumer believes and wants is what we need to be talking about. I think the question is, what are the roots of each of our brands? And I think each of our brands have very strong roots that they can be part of. Some parts are brands that are Indian, that is really authentic, coming from brands that come from there. Some brands have strong purposes about them. I'm saying each of our brands have some roots to which they belong. And I think as long as you're authentic to those roots, I think we can all build strong brands.
Another aspect which I know that brand custodians and marketers often perhaps ignore or don't think enough about, and that really is in an increasingly commoditized market, if you're not creating a category, you're perhaps going to end up in failure. How do you see this as going forward, and do you believe that this is going to be something that Indian brands specifically, I mean, I don't mean that from a national or another perspective, but brands competing in the Indian market are going to have to continue to carve out newer categories to be able to dominate them?
Yeah, I mean, Royal Enfield is a great example of a brand that has basically stuck to its knitting, and the knitting has been that it's always been a brand that's been saying, look, are we playing in the motorcycle business or are we playing in the leisure business? And it's playing out even better than we had anticipated. The fact is that the markets moved to us. We haven't moved in terms of what our resolve has been. So it's a great example of saying, if you stick to the knitting and you really believe in, and that goes back to the point about this multinational versus Indian brands. The brands have to be relevant. The brands have to be up to something. If the brands are up to something, it will find people who believe in what the brand believes in. The rest is all commercial and other stuff that is detailed.
How easy is it going to be for marketers to be able to develop this new skill and really develop this new muscle?
We've heard more about it. I do think that emotion is becoming a much bigger part of the way that people are making decisions. And a lot of marketing has been built on kind of quite a linear, I'll consider something, I'll think about it, emotion will come into it. But the conversation about purpose, the emotion, I think part of the reason why Indian brands are doing so well, and it's not just a phenomenon in India, we see it in Indonesia, we see it in China. Local brands, whether they're owned by multinationals or they're owned by local companies, are really resonating.
It is time for us to take a short break. When we return, we speak to Eric Salama, CEO Kantar, about the challenges that the group faces globally, its strategies worldwide and plans for India. We'll be right back.